Since my last video on Supergiant, I've gone back and played more of Pyre, and I have to say that the way that game lets you manipulate the ending depending on how you play Magic Basketball makes it redeemable as a game from a narrative perspective. Am I interested in playing the game all the way to the end? Not really. Mostly because I feel that there's only so many rights I can handle before I get bored with the game. Pyre's main weakness is its repetition, and sure, the NPCs get harder as the game goes on as they develop greater strategies against you, but the payoff feels so mediocre. Then you have Hades, which falls into the roguelike genre, or roguelite, since the hardcore video game analyst might get upset with me, whose genre is the very definition of repetition. Every roguelike game since the dawn of time has had the same formula. Enter a room, or series of rooms, defeat enemies, get to the next level, repeat ad nauseum until you either beat the game, which is extremely unlikely, or die, whereupon you're sent back to ground zero. Slay the Spire, FTL Faster Than Light, and even Darkest Dungeon to an extent all fall into this category, and after I poured a certain amount of hours into those games, I can say with certainty that they all get rather boring after a while. And while all those aforementioned games are rather linear, Hades is dynamic in nearly every aspect, all the way down to how the game makes death not such a bad thing. Yes, you do have to start your run all over again, but you're able to use some keepsakes that you gained over the course of a run to better improve your stats. It's similar to Darkest Dungeon in a way, where not everything is completely weighing in on one run, and successful looting means more powerful characters in the long run, which in turn makes us more of a roguelite rather than a roguelike. As a filthy casual though, I prefer the roguelite style, because even though death is painful in the sense that I haven't beaten the game, it doesn't mean that I'm without tools to arm myself for the next attempt. Come to think of it, the system that Hades has in place makes me want to actually face the next challenge that lies ahead of me. Oftentimes I feel like roguelikes have that one enemy that you never want to face, like, oh boy, this Slay the Spire run is going well, I sure hope I don't run into the gremlin. Fuck! Because the rewards that you can receive in Hades are entirely up to the player's discretion. It is the definition of self-rewarding, and in its own clever way, the game is striking a deal with the player like a god from Greek mythos striking a deal with another being. You can get this pile of darkness, but you have to clear this room of enemies first kind of deal. The rooms are relatively easy to clear, but they require you to use everything at your disposal to do so. You have a dash that's like whoosh, an attack that's like and in a special ability that changes with each weapon, and a cast that's like pew. Some of the items you pick up permanently increase the effects of these abilities, like unlocking a second dash, increasing damage against enemies marked by your cast, and even straight up giving you multiple lives. Those effects are permanent and gradually improve over time as you die, and use what you gain over the run to improve these stats. The really powerful effects come from the ones that you pick up during a run, which expire when you die. With this system in place, death is really more of an irritation than anything else, and a chance to sit back and evaluate strategies for the next fight. It's irritating because you can feel like you had the winning power-up or boon combo only to see your hopes shattered once again by Theseus and Asterius. Wait for it.
As has Asterius. And this time we are filled with renewed vigor to destroy you utterly.
Boom. Same energy. In other ways, death is kind of a good thing. Since dying is technically a reset that also gives you an opportunity to advance your stats, the game also uses that reset to advance in terms of its dialogue. Now, I don't have triple digits worth of hours in this game yet, so I don't know the full extent of the dialogue trees, but with a few exceptions, I haven't heard the same line of dialogue repeated once, which is highly impressive for a game as repetitive as a roguelite. You play as Zagreus, Hades' lone offspring, who is hell-bent on escaping his father's realm to eventually find his mother on the surface and meet with the other gods on Olympus. Being the lone son of the god of death has its own unique facets and interactions with various characters, most of whom, or which we understand to know Zagreus or his familial position rather well. What I love most about it all is how Zagreus is treated like he's a well-known figure that these characters have interacted with for who knows how many years, and their interactions reflect that. Anime. Take notes, please. Everything in this game is fully voiced, which is a massive step up from the mumble speech that dominated Pyre. Now I understand that the speech in Pyre wasn't in plain English because of how it aligned with the lore in that game, but there's so much more personality that can be put into fully voiced lines, and it really shows here in Hades. What I like most about the voice acting is that it's formal in the way that you'd expect from characters from Greek mythology, but it's not so boring or without humor that it feels like you're being read a history lecture. Plus, learning about each character's history with or without Zagreus is beyond fascinating to me, and the all-around solid voice acting lends itself to a great diversity between each character's personality. This is the best voice actor in the game. Who's a good boy? Darren Korb returns once again to orchestrate the amazing soundtrack for this game, which is, as always, nothing short of spectacular. If Transistor was the weird pseudo-electronic post-rock kind of mix, and Pyre was a soundtrack filled with whimsical tunes that covered a broad variety of genres, then Hades is what I consider to be the most aggressive of them all. The game has you cleave your way through scores of undead enemies, an act that is supplemented well by minor intonations, power chords, and 8th signatures that are designed to hit hard and fast. Out of all of the soundtrack albums so far, I could genuinely see Hades as being the kind of album that you listen to during your workout, for the most part. And for every 5 chambers that you spend listening to, you get in return both of these soundtracks are equally welcome in this game because its layout and design allows for both genres to exist equally. So let me explain what I mean. If you had a game like Terraria, which we probably all know well at this point for its 16-bit soundtrack, that suddenly swapped its video game-esque style for some theme out of Skyrim whenever you return home, it would be rather jarring. Here in Hades, it is jarring to go from electric guitar power chords to simple plucking on acoustic strings, yet the game is designed to allow for both sounds to coexist. The upbeat rock and roll gets me all tensed up, and when I walk into a room that I know is safe, I can't help but breathe a sigh of relief upon hearing the much more laid-back rhythms associated with these brief moments of respite. I imagine that that's what Zagreus is feeling as well. He spent Zeus knows how much of his strength trying to get out, so being able to stop somewhere and catch his breath amid the death and destruction must be comforting. Apparently the soundtrack is dynamic as well, wherein after clearing a room, the game will take the soundtrack that was playing and then pick one track, as in the drums or bass or guitar, and then play that at much lower volume until your next encounter. And the people over at Supergiant really thought of anything, and this game isn't even out of early access yet. Like, what? I'm about 8 minutes into this video now, and I haven't gotten around to talking about the gameplay yet. That's just how chock full of content this game is. Before you start a run, you have an option between 5 different weapons at the time of writing, each of which are from some corner of Greek mythology, or they would have at least reasonably existed at the time. First is my personal favorite, the sword, which chops twice, stabs on the 3rd hit, and has an ability that deals damage in an area. It's very straightforward and consistent with its damage. Second lovely weapon of mass re-murder is the Spear of Varatha, which stabs in a very narrow line, can be thrown and retrieved with its ability, while holding down left click causes Zagreus to charge up and then sweep the spear around himself in a circle. And then you have the shield. You can bash, hold down the block, and then charge enemies and throw it like Captain America. There's nothing too special, but with upgrades it easily becomes the most powerful weapon of all. And after the most powerful weapon in the game comes what I think is the weakest weapon in the game, the bow and arrow. See, a lot of your runs are going to look like this. So do you really think I have the time to wait for a bow and arrow shot to charge up? And finally, we have the weapon that is by far the most iconic to ancient Greece, the automatic rifle complete with a grenade launcher. No, this is not a joke. There's actually a 12-bullet magazine automatic rifle in this game that can either be the best or worst weapon depending on how your run goes. When I say how your run goes, I mean in terms of power-ups that you can get that vastly improve your damage output or utility. Hades is based around Zagreus escaping, well, Hades, and the gods of Olympus are willing to aid him in his escape, sending him these powerful blessings, or boons as they're known, to help with his escape. Each god and goddess has their own facets of the game that they manipulate with these boons. So Artemis boons increase your overall damage output and crit chance, Poseidon knocks your opponents away, Dionysus inflicts poison on your opponent, and so forth. Depending on what weapon you have and what other boons you have leading up to a certain point in the game, you may tend to gravitate towards receiving one god's blessing over another. This is where most of the game's RNG and replayability comes in. You're not guaranteed that the same deities that showed up in your last run will show up here, and plus not every boon is good with every weapon. What I love about this game, and what I love about Supergiant in general, is the customization that is readily available to me as a player. No 2 runs have to feel the same, and the fact that that is a variable which I have some control over is kind of amazing in the way that it helps redefine a lot of what has burnt me out on roguelikes after all these years. The combat at a glance is pretty mindless, and admittedly you can get pretty far by constantly spamming out all of your buttons. However, what I find gets you the furthest is when you stop and think about what combos you want to pull off, who or what you want to mark with your cast, and how you use your abilities, etc. Understanding your opponent's attack patterns is vitally important to success, which I guess is a bit of a no-brainer statement, but when you're really in the thick of it, it's hard to remember that, oh yeah, there are other buttons aside from left click. I think that the best word I can use to summarize this game is satisfying. It's satisfying to clear an encounter, satisfying to defeat a boss, and even if I die, it's still satisfying to hear the amazing voice acting and soundtrack all over again. And that's all I really have to say about this one. Thanks for watching, hope you all have a great day, night, or space cycle depending on when and where you watch this video, and I'll see you on the flip side. Goodbye.